Happy April 29th, Everyday Athlete Podcast Network listeners. Welcome to the latest episode of Enduring Minds, a show where we're going beyond the finish line, but in a way that is different from other shows. We are looking to get into the depths of our guests to understand what makes them move, what makes them shake, the obstacles that they have overcome all along the way to find their own finish line. I'm super excited to be joined by my co-host, Evan Birch, who is basically the brainchild for this whole thing that started a couple of years ago with a text message that said, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you about business." And next thing you know, our business is the show of Enduring Minds. So I'm super excited to have Evan and our guest, Badia Weeks, who I met about 3 or 4 months ago through the platform Threads, who in her post, it was a super audacious statement that said, "I want to be the first Black woman to be a High Rocks world champion." And I was like, hell yeah, let's get this lady on Enduring Minds. And so before we bring her on, let me bring on the co-host, Evan Birch. Evan, how are you, man?
I am good, enjoying my snowy day inside. That about sums it up today.
Just so people know, yes, this is being published on April 29th. It is March 25th as of the recording. So you're not confused and looking out your window.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I figured I'd wear my hat for the day and feel like I'm at the beach.
Perfect. It is also opening day for baseball here today. So by the time we roll around into a month from now and the show goes live, I may not be wearing the Mets hat any longer, depending on how well they do in the first 30 days of the season.
Yeah. And I think this is our first High Rocks, like specific athlete that we've had on the show. So it's, we're branching out.
I wrote a blog post earlier in March about 3 athletes under 30 that influenced me. And one of them was an Enduring Minds guest, Vic, who during our conversation with him really inspired me with his concept of the $1 Ultra not growing to be this massive event. It didn't seem interested in making this super big. And I thought that was a really interesting take. And then I chatted with Badia, and this idea of I want to be a world champion, the first Black female world champion. I thought it was so audacious. Like my generation, we don't really say stuff like that. I'm a Gen Xer. And so I was like, that's really influential to put something that big out there. And that has led me to say, okay, I'm going to be doing something big too. And I want to do more big things. So just the combination of those 2 athletes plus Mariah was awesome. So I'm super excited to have Badia on the show and really dive into her story so people can understand where this idea of being the first Black world champion High Rocks athlete comes from.
Yeah, I think, I'm excited to get into the conversation, but I do want to find out, because we are recording this right after you've finished the Oakland Marathon, I do want to just touch on that briefly. What was your experience? Just tell me the brief.
It was amazing. I just posted on the Run Try Bike Instagram page sort of the 4 lessons I learned, but I'll give you the brief thing, which is I was chasing fun and enjoyment over a time. And it's probably the first time in 19 years I've done that. And it was an amazing experience. I still finished in under 4.5 hours for my first marathon in 14 years. I'm stoked about that. But even that falls to the wayside in terms of importance when it comes to just the enjoyment and the community that I was able to tag into with Lori and Santino when we met with Hella Bay Running and Black Men Run Bay Area. Just that connection was everything. If I didn't race this weekend, that would have been enough.
Yeah, that's incredible. And speaking of community, I know Badia is big in the community in Philadelphia, so I'm excited to get her on here.
Yeah, so let's no more rambling. This isn't Enduring Minds with Jason and Evan. Let's get our guest on the show. Hey, Badia, how are you?
I'm well. How are you guys? Excited to be here.
I am so stoked to have you on the show. As I mentioned, you are one of those 3 under 30 athletes that has inspired me. And so every time I see you put up a post about competing at High Rocks or your community building with Endure, I get excited. So I'm super excited to have you on the show. But before we get started, I have to ask you to help me pronounce the name of the knots that you are wearing in your hair, because when I read it a certain way, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing it incorrectly.
They're called Bantu knots.
Okay.
Knots, yeah.
And what is the significance behind them?
Yeah, so I posted a video on my Instagram and TikTok that was like, where did you get the idea of becoming the Bantu knot girl? And it's a picture of me as a little girl with a similar hairstyle. And was something that I wore often as a kid. And when I had my debut High Rocks race in DC, my goal was to show up as unapologetically Black as possible. And I thought about, what better hairstyle, something that, can ethnically be tied back to Africa, which a lot of, Black people have roots in. So yeah, that was the cultural significance. I wanted no if, ands, or buts about who I was.
That's awesome. So we normally start our show with this question, but the hairstyle I wanted to make sure I pronounced correctly.
Yes.
So the first question we ask every one of our guests, because it opens a door into who they are far more significantly than me just reading a list of accolades that you have accomplished over your lifetime. And so the simple question is, who is Badia Weeks?
Hmm. That's a great question. Badia Weeks is multifaceted. A famous phrase that I always use is "I'm just a girl." I'm just a girl doing big things with a call that God has given me, and I'm excited to walk out that call.
I'm going to take Jason's stance on this question now. I get to do the reverse because I've been doing the hosting for a little while, but it's always interesting to hear the first thing that
Mm,
people say. I
yeah,
think that's the most real answer you're going to get is the first one.
yeah,
So why multifaceted? Why is that the first thing that came to your mind? And I will say multifaceted and the term just a girl.
yeah.
Now, some people may see that as minimizing, but
Mm.
I don't hear that in your voice. I hear that as like loud and proud.
Yes. Yeah, I go back and forth in that statement often because people think that I utilize it to, like you said, minimize or talk down on myself. But for me, it's always a reminder. I think a lot of the times in life, being somebody who's multifaceted, we get the labels that are attached to us, and people see me as an athlete, or they see me as a director, or they see me as a founder, and they forget that I'm just a girl too. And so it's a reminder to the world, but also a reminder to myself that I do not have to be the labels that are attached to me. They're great. The titles are great. But at my core, I'm just a human being.
This is fascinating to me because when I launched this business 6 years ago, it was for everyday athletes because we are multifaceted.
Mhm.
The issue and the problem that comes along is today's digital world, the algorithm says in order to gain notoriety, I put that in air quotes, you have to be one thing.
Right.
And I'm 52, you're the reverse numbers, you're 25. And so how do you work that into who you are when the digital world is saying, Badia, it's cool that you're a director, it's cool that you're a community organizer, it's cool that you're a High Rocks athlete, but give me the one thing that you are so that I can then explode your platform so that others can see it.
Yeah, I had a huge challenge with that was initially starting my social media platform because, you know, people are told you're told to niche down. And I had absolutely no desire to niche down because I am not just one thing at all. I think that I am blessed to be able to have the different spaces that I show up in. They blend seamlessly. Where, I am a director at a company called Fitness Alive, which is a swim school and fitness based company. But I still work in the sports and athletics world, and they're partnered with Indoor. So I get to like bring Indoor in there and be this community builder. But a lot of the work that I do at Fitness Alive is community oriented. Working in the fitness industry it's pretty easy for me to be somebody who goes to the gym and be an athlete. And then, I tie that all into, my relationship with God and my faith, because I wouldn't be the person that I am without my relationship with God. So I think it's challenging when you try to do a bunch of things that are all over the place. But I have a great way and a great network to be able to make everything make sense, but still be able to show up in different spaces. So yeah, I would say that what has been allowed me to like sustain that multifaceted nature and be able to demonstrate that on social media as well.
That idea of just a girl, I got to come back to it because I wanted to say something before Jason had his question. It feels very grounding. Like it's one of those things that you can come back to and strip all the labels away, strip all of the things that people perceive you to be, and you get to just be you, like unapologetically. And I think that that's what I'm hearing in it. And I just want people to understand and hear that, because we talk about this a lot, about if you tie yourself too closely to the things that you do, they become all that you are. And then if those things aren't there anymore, you feel like you don't even know who you are anymore. So it seems like you're very grounded for 25. Like you are a very grounded individual, and I can hear that just in your answers. So I just don't want to touch on that before I go to my next question. And this idea of community, I've struggled with the word lately only because seeing these larger brands and these larger companies try to come into the run clubs and these organizations, and I don't want to say wreck the vibe, but change the vibe and make it more commercialized. Like, what's community to you in the spaces that you're in?
Yeah, community is something that is so important to me because I feel like a huge part of my life was built upon loneliness, was built upon isolation. And so, community for me is being able to have that mutual support in our everyday lives. Getting the opportunity to do life together is something that I think is critically important. But I think you also have to learn the lines in which community is drawn. Like I think community and friendships are different things. You need to have friends, but you need to have community. And there have been seasons of my life where I've had really strong community, and there have been seasons of life where I've had really good friendships. I look at community as a space where you get the opportunity to just belong. It's not a space where you have to try. It's not a space where you have to be anything other than who you are. You get to just show up and you get to belong. Um, Sorry that we have an additional guest that I did not mention, who you may hear back and forth in the background. Shout out to Dior for having her time. But yes, for community, it is definitely that space where you get to belong, that space where you get to know that people are going to love you and support you and show up for you unequivocally without question. People who know your name, people who know your face, people who hold you accountable, people who know your story. And so I think community has to be intentional. And I've definitely seen those spaces, like you mentioned, where those commercialized brands are coming in. And I think there's onus on the founders and leaders and organizers of those different spaces to ensure that utilizing those partnerships is to, one, be a benefit to the community, and two, make sure that it's still intentional in how they are being positioned.
Yeah, when I talk about inclusion, community, diversity with Run, Try, Bike, and Everyday Athlete Clubhouse, I always talk about building a bigger table. Like, don't tell people to walk away. And my immediate vision as you were talking was the cookout, right? So like when you're at the cookout, that is community. Somebody is cooking, somebody's bringing food, somebody's bringing drink. You're all working together, and all these different conversations are happening. Now imagine if Amazon came in and all of a sudden was like, this is the cookout brought to you by Amazon, right? It doesn't feel genuine. And I often struggle with this because we're a business. We have to make money to survive. And I struggle with this idea sometimes of, who do we really want to partner with who is going to actually value the community for the community as
Yeah.
opposed to valuing the community for the next sale?
Yeah.
So with you and the community with Endure that you're building, do you have, I don't want to say like written bullet points of what partnerships have to look like, but
Right.
do you have an idea and a concept of what it does need to be in order for it to work for you and the members that you have?
Yeah, that has been a very interesting journey that I've had to start embarking on because as I have been putting out these bold, audacious statements that you've mentioned, and showing up as apologetically myself in these spaces, it has caught attention. It has, caused brands to reach out and want to work with me, and I've had to now kind of navigate that space of like, is this a brand that I want to work with because like I'm able to leverage it for my own personal gain, or does this brand even align with what I am doing and what I am representing and the mission that I have at hand? And I think a lesson that everybody can take with them is that uh, all money is not good money. And I think the same goes for deals and partnerships and things of that nature. Just because somebody's offering you something does not mean that it is worth taking. Because if you take it, there you gotta sell your soul away in some ways and have to really kind of change how you show up. So for me, it is definitely critically important that any brands, any organizations that I partner with are passionate and mission driven individuals. And I think what immediately comes to mind for me is this concept of storytelling. I am somebody where, in terms of being a content creator, I'm not the cinematographer, videographer, photographer. I do a lot of very candid content. But what I am excellent at is telling stories. And so when I look at brands that I am working with, what stories are you telling and whose stories are you telling? And if I cannot see that the stories that you are telling align with the missions of diversity and equity and inclusion and accessibility that I am standing for, then our stories probably aren't going to blend harmoniously.
I want to follow up on that answer and the previous answer about community, because in that previous answer about community, you mentioned loneliness and isolation.
Mhm.
And as an entrepreneur, there are a lot of moments, not moments, there are a lot of moments of loneliness and isolation. How do you manage that concept that is different today than it was when you were talking earlier about kind of growing up through, going through life a little bit? Like, what was isolation back then? What's isolation today? And how do you manage it?
Yeah, I think there's a huge dichotomy that is not fully understood between being alone and loneliness. I think growing up, I experienced a lot of loneliness. And with that, feeling like there was nowhere to turn to. The ways in which I can elaborate on that is growing up. I'm originally from Wilmington, Delaware. I started off in private school. I was one of two Black kids in my class. So I had no shared experience. I had nobody to confide in. And more often than not, I was the butt of the joke. I was the person that was bullied. That translated over, into being in the sport of swimming, where again, thankfully, I did get the opportunity to swim with a predominantly Black swim team with a predominantly Black coaching staff. But, when we would go out and compete, you're out there on your own by yourself, and it's up to you to, figure the different things out. Similarly, being very isolated and lonely in the mental health struggles that I had and being able to cope with it. There was no degree of support that was present. And so that loneliness was defined by I had nowhere to turn to and I had nowhere to gain resources or the support necessary to properly sort through the challenges that life threw my way. when I look at entrepreneurship now, I don't necessarily look at it as loneliness, more so than I look at it as being alone. And in that being alone piece is, it's my baby. Like, this is being birthed from my brain. Regardless of the amount of support that I have, no one can enter my brain as much as I would love for people to be able to have the opportunity to do that. And so there are certain things that must be birthed by myself, so that is executed in a way that is not diluted by other people's stories and thoughts and visions. And so I can't say that I feel lonely, because I have several members in my community that are also entrepreneurs, that are also founders, that are also mission driven individuals, that are going through similar struggles, that I do get the camaraderie of doing hard things with. But I do have to be alone at times, and that's not a bad thing.
When it comes to the loneliness and the isolation, I hear something a lot deeper that I want to dig into,
Please.
because I mean, the highs are high, the lows are low.
Yes.
And a lot of us talk about these things. We talk about loneliness, isolation, depression, anxiety. We talk about them, but what I hear less and less being talked about is what it actually feels like in your body
Mm,
when those things are happening, and
mhm.
what that actually does to your like motivation, your desire to continue, all of those things. So when you're experiencing those, I'll say like at your lowest low, what does that feel like in your body?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, when I think about the moments in my life that I was struggling significantly with my mental health, I think anxiety and depression feel very differently. I think depression just feels like somebody put on like gray sunglasses. It feels heavy, like there is an elephant that is sitting on top of you, that no matter how hard you fight to try to get up, it's still like you are trying to push this immovable weight off of you. I think it feels like being cloudy. Like, I imagine, how you have to get an oil change for your car and you just put the wrong oil in there and it just has no opportunity to work in an optimal way. Um, it just feels exhausting and sluggish. Like, you try to sleep as much as you can, but you never have the energy necessary to be able to feel energized and recharged. And then when I go to anxiety, I think about it as like the butterflies in your stomach, the pitter patter that you just can't get rid of, the restlessness, the constant evolving of the thoughts that take this doom spiral. And it's just like true fight or flight mode. Like, you never get the opportunity to just be at rest. And I think being somebody that had been diagnosed clinically with depression and generalized anxiety disorder, experiencing the two, which both, of course, are mental health conditions, but I think are on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the symptoms that you feel. It is like a wild roller coaster, where you go up and up and up and up, and it's like that anxiety anticipation, and then you crash down. And it can be really challenging to have to bounce back and forth between those two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I think I see it as this like piece of paper that's being ripped in half, and you don't know which side to go on.
Yes.
And I mean, I don't have a question on it. I know Jason probably has a follow up for this one, but that's what it feels like, because I too have gone down the depression, anxiety, and
Mhm,
unfortunately PTSD route, and that's what it feels like, a piece of paper that's being ripped that you don't know which side to turn to.
mhm,
Yeah, my follow-up question, or the question I was thinking about, is I am blown away that at the age of 25 you are so open about these conversations.
mhm,
I said it in the intro. It really wasn't until Evan started this show and I did Evan and I started this show a couple years ago, and they own who was another co-host, and Evan asked me questions, and I showed my hands. Like I was sweating because this just wasn't something that my generation talked about. We buried all of this stuff. And so Evan has allowed me to bring this out. My wife, Lori, has allowed me to talk about this stuff and feel like, okay, this is what you should be doing as opposed to you should be burying it. Did you have mentors, family, friends that were open about these types of depression and anxiety struggles that were the examples? And if not, how did this come about? Because I am blown away by how open you are, really.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I'll be honest, I didn't have it, and that's my motivation for doing it. My personal mission statement in life is to be everything that I never had the opportunity to have. When I think about my life, a lot of my testimony was built through my teenage years and then, like, heading into my early 20s. And I think about how many moments I could have been, I don't want to say saved, but things could have went differently if I would have just had somebody who was open, who was honest, who, was vulnerable and showing me that I was not crazy. I probably started dealing with anxiety and depression when I was probably in the fifth or sixth grade. And I didn't get diagnosed until I had a suicide attempt. So that entire, and that was my freshman year of college. So that entire stretch of time, I just felt like I was crazy. And the things that I was experiencing, no one else experienced it. Like I truly thought that my thought patterns, my emotions, my like deep, dark, ugly parts were things that I only had to deal with. And I think back of like if I would have just had somebody shine light on their ugliness, how I would have had the opportunity to feel worthy and validated in what I was experiencing and maybe could have coped with it better then. And having done a lot of work with teenagers, middle school kids, kids that are transitioning into college, I try to shine every light on every ugly part that I've ever experienced because if it can give them the power to, one, feel valid in what they're experiencing, but two, know that they're not alone, and three, be able to know that if I can be vulnerable and honest with it and I can demonstrate that I've learning how to, yeah, just born out. I don't desire anybody that ever has the opportunity to come into community with me to experience any of the things that I experienced.
I don't have a question. I'm going to hand the mic over to Evan in a second, but I do have a couple of statements. One, you're going to make me cry because it's super powerful to know that there are people as young as yourself out there having these conversations that will impact people your age and hopefully older. Hopefully, there are people my age that are listening to this and watching this and are impacted by it. Because that's been the goal of our show from the beginning, is to let people know that they're not alone, that the struggles that they have are everyday struggles, and we're all going through some form of them. And so being able to connect with people on that level is massive. So thank you for doing that. And then the other thing I want to say to people my generation, like the kids are going to be all right, people. Like if they're having these conversations, the kids are going to be all right. Like let's let them have their time in the sun and give them their flowers because they're going to be all right.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, depression, having gone through it, I mean, it never leaves you, and that I think that's the one thing that people need to understand is these things don't just disappear. It's always something that you're living with, but it's something that you now have the tools and the awareness to be able to action. And I think that's the one thing that I found with depression is it wants you alone, it wants you isolated, and every thought that comes up that says like, oh, you shouldn't go to that thing, from what you're saying, your suicide attempt in college, obviously, I mean, that's a hugely transformative time for anybody in their life. um, I think I want to go a little bit deeper if you're comfortable with it, Badia, because I think people don't truly realize that when people say they've had a suicide attempt or they've gone down that road, that like that decision is not, it's not like this like light bulb that goes off and is like, I'm going to do this.
Mhm.
It's literally a cascading effect of multiple things that have happened over a long period of time that have gotten you to the point where this is your answer. This is your answer to stop everything else from happening. So
Mhm.
if you feel comfortable, if you could walk us through just like what were you thinking in those exact moments when that was happening and you were making that decision, because I think this is a hugely pivotal time for, I mean, I saw a post the other day. I was talking about a 9-year old that went to their mom that said, I don't want to be here anymore. And I'm like, I have two daughters, 8 and 11, and
Yeah.
my heart would just be ripped into shreds if I heard that from one of my daughters.
Yeah.
You talk about bullying, you talk about all this stuff and social media and all this heightened screen and all this impact. But like, if you could just walk us through that, I would really appreciate it, because I think listeners need to hear this.
Yeah, I will walk through that, and then I want to address something that you mentioned of like depression never leaving afterwards. So I'll give a little bit of context to my story. So growing up, of course, I already kind of highlighted what it was like, being in school as like the only black person, being in a sport where you were the only black person. Another aspect of that as well is that I am somebody who graduated high school at 16. I never went to kindergarten. I did first and second grade in the same school year, and then I went to third grade at 6. And so I grew up socialized with like my teenage cousins, like everybody. I have a younger brother, but I was surrounded by teenagers and people that were older than me, and so going through that rapid transition, not only was I intelligent, but I didn't socialize well with kids my age, because I didn't spend a whole lot of time with kids. So there was that lack of belonging, that lack of being able to connect, and that isolation piece that really challenges you. But greater than that, my parents got divorced as well when I was 9. And at that point in time, my mother moved us to Philly to be able to be closer to the swim team that I swam on. And so I'm dealing with that grief of like my family unit falling apart. I'm dealing with bullying. I'm dealing with not feeling like I belong. I'm dealing with this like acceleration on my life. Like there's all of these different factors where my ability to acclimate and build systems to cope was not aligning at the pace that life was moving. I remember having that moment where I came to my mother and I was like, I don't know what's going on, but I don't feel okay. I don't feel like the thoughts that I'm having, like I feel crazy. And her response to me was to just pray about it. And that's a really tough response for, a 10-year-old, when I had not been taught how to have relationship with God. And I thought about, the church. I thought about Bible and like how scripture will say no weapon formed against you will prosper. But the weapons in my life were feeling like they were prospering. And my mother never checked in on me after that. Why? Because I was the kid that ticked off all the boxes. Like I got all A's. I graduated high school with above a 4.0 GPA. I was competing at a national level in swimming. I, would get national scholarship here, this there, that. So on the surface, I looked fine. But what nobody knew or understood was the cost that I paid to perform. Throughout middle school, turning into high school, No one knew that I was popping pills. No one knew that I had an eating disorder. No one knew, like, I started getting high and drunk at 14. No one knew these things because all that was paid attention to was if I was checking off the boxes. So there was this big valuation of the product over the process in my life. And, graduating high school, going into college, I did not end up going to the school that my parents wanted me to go to. So they made the decision to no longer financially support me. And so here I was, 16 years old, and I couldn't even sign my own documents because I'm not a legal adult. But I was working 4 jobs to support myself. I was overloaded on credits, and trying to just balance life. And as I mentioned and kind of alluded to, I had a lot of identity issues, just going through the way that my life was kind of organized. And by the time I went to college, I was no longer swimming. And one thing that I had the ability to hold on to was that I was intelligent. I knew, if nothing else, I was smart. My first semester in college, I got a 2.7 and my world shattered, because it was like the one thing that I could rely on that I was good at, I wasn't, or I didn't feel like I was. And so that was really kind of a pivotal breaking point for me, as well as the fact of just with the high levels of stress that I was carrying, the lack of self care. Like, I was in and out of the hospital for nothing other than just like stress riddling my body. And so, at the time, you're also in relationships in college and things of that nature, and social relationships were not going well. And I just remember like coming to this point of like, I'm not smart. I'm not talented. No one cares. What am I fighting for? And, then you make the decision of like, it's not going to get better. Like, when I look over the past part of my life, every day that I told myself that it was going to get better, it didn't. So why continue to make it happen? In that, I popped over 70 pills because I was like, if I'm going to get out of here, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to get out of here. And it was in that moment that I had a divine encounter with the Lord. It was in that moment where he came, he stopped me, and he told me that, daughter, it's not your time yet. And I remember arguing with him. Like, I remember being like, what do you mean it's not your time, my time yet? Like, I've done everything that I could possibly do within my own strength. And like, that was the issue because I was trying to do it all in my own strength. But I'm so glad that that encounter happened because I wouldn't have called for help. I was out in the woods beyond, like, behind my campus. So like, the chances of someone finding me and stumbling across from me, that wasn't gonna happen. Um, but I had the opportunity to call for help. All glory to God, organs shut down, going into a coma, all the things. 3 days later, I was fine. I had nothing wrong, like no ill effects that took root after that. Um, but that is what got me and broke me and like led me up to the point of making that decision. And now being on the flip side of that decision and that journey in my life, I wouldn't change it for the world. I'm so grateful that it happened. One, because it has proven to me the level of resiliency that I have. But two, it gives me the opportunity to now speak and touch and impact people that I would have never been able to do so had I not been through that. And I believe that sometimes God allows us to experience bad things because he's not just concerned about us, but he's concerned about the people that we are meant to impact. And he gave me something that I was able to handle. I did handle it. I'm continuing to handle it. And now I get to be a voice for others, and be able to demonstrate that, like, just because that was your story, It's not where it ends. It's why I have a semicolon tattooed on my wrist, because it's just a pause. It's just a break in the sentence, and you get to write that next chapter.
I wrote the words duality of life.
Mm.
And as I was writing it, I looked at it and I thought that D looks like a Q. So I highlighted it, and the Q is there too, right? Quality of life.
Mm.
And so when you think about the duality of life and the quality of life, do you find comfort in knowing that you going through the struggle has led to this component? And if you didn't go through the struggle, would the quality of life be valued the way you value it?
Yeah, I don't think it would be valued the way that I value it, because I think you have to understand the depths of something to value the heights of something. You have to know what you don't want to know what you really do want. And being somebody that has experienced the pits of all kinds of things, um, I value community so much more because I had loneliness. I value having a sound mind now more because I know what it's like to live in chaos. And it allows me to protect that much more because I know what it's like to be on the flip side of those things. But I think it's also a huge motivator in the things that I do, for two reasons. One being that when I am facing hard things, like when I was mid High Rocks race and I wanted nothing more than to quit, I saw somebody who had a sign that was like, "You've done harder things than this. Keep going." And in that moment, I reflected on all of the very hard things that I have been through in my life. And I'm like, yeah, I absolutely have. Like, High Rocks can eat a bowl, and I'm going to continue to like do and be amazing because I have done things that are so much harder than this. But I also just reflect back on that encounter with the Lord and Him saying that it's not my time yet, and it being true. And every moment when I want to give up, I think about how I was ready to exit stage left and I didn't. And I'm here and I'm making impact and I'm transforming lives and I'm being everything beyond like my wildest dreams. So why would I stop now? That wouldn't make sense. Because I could have given up a long ago if that was the case. So yes, I can absolutely say that all of the things that I have been through in life, that duality is important to be able to understand the lows to value the highs, but it also does create fuel to the fire to be able to protect and motivate that quality of life too.
That idea of pain into purpose. That
Yes.
that I mean, it's one of those things, like, to hear you say that you're grateful for it. I'm the exact same way.
Mhm.
I wouldn't be having these conversations
Mhm.
with you, with Jason, these last 2 years had I not had to walk through that path myself. And now it kind of comes back to, and I'm curious with High Rocks if you see it the way that I see it, with the way that I am with ultra running, that I get to choose my hard now.
Mm.
I get that choice because you don't get to choose when life throws something at you.
Yeah.
But now I have this like well to pull from. And
Yeah.
I, just like you said, you made it through everything else. Like
Yeah.
that's your proof. That the proof is there, right? And like my personal mission statement with everything that I'm doing with my athletes that I coach and everybody is, I
Mhm.
want to champion individuals who embrace exercise as a form of self-love, a space to be vulnerable, and a place to grow beyond measure.
Yeah.
And like you embody that, like exactly the type of person that I see in that statement that I put out there. And I want to get into your big, bold, audacious statement of being the first Black female world champion High Rocks.
Yeah.
Like, kudos to you. Like, I full claps. Like, you may not be able to hit a claps, but like to put a goal out there that probably scares the shit out of you
Mhm.
is probably the thing that most people need to do but aren't doing.
Yeah.
So like, what does that goal mean to you right now today?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with you in what you mentioned of like getting to choose your hard. And I think for me, fitness has just been a space where I get the opportunity to like learn more about myself, learn more about how resilient I am, how cool I am, how much like I can show up in these spaces. So getting to not only choose the hard and the pain that I go through, but continuing to show myself the limits that I can break through and surpass, I think is so needed and necessary in a world that, going full circle, tries to put you in boxes, tries to put labels on you, tries to whatever. And so for me, fitness and now High Rocks has really become an outlet for that. I am really just the type of person that if I'm going to do something, why not shoot for the best? Like, I can't settle for being mid. I must be the absolute best at something that I can, and not, in comparison to others, but the best version of myself that I can be when I make these statements. Um, I believe that faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. So me making these statements is me just being bold and courageous and believing that if I have the faith to believe in something, that nothing is impossible for me. And not even with me being the one that does it, but with God on my side, who can be against me? And so that's really the stance that I take on it, of like, dare to dream big. When we dream small, like small things can only happen, but when I dream big, only big things can happen. And I think if nothing else, back to the word of duality, my saying of being the first Black High Rocks world champion, there's duality in that statement that I think people don't always understand. Of like, yes, I would love to athletically be able to achieve the title of world champion. That'd be amazing. That would be great. But I desire to be the first Black international advocate for people of color in High Rocks. And that is a world champion too. So while I'm on the journey of training to be as athletically capable and powerful as I can be a global advocate for people to show up in a space in which they may not thought that they could have showed up in. We're even bigger than High Rocks, but just talking about how fitness can be a means of you being able to be the best version of yourself that you possibly can be.
You've given us a lot of motivation for why you want to go down this path. So I'm going to remove the word depends. You cannot use the word depends for your answer to this question.
Okay.
In those hard moments when you're training and the idea of doing one more X just feels impossible to do, what motivates you to do that next whatever X is?
It's bigger than me. It's bigger than me. It's not like the things that I'm doing is not just about me. It's not like when I broke down crying after I crossed the finish line at High Rocks, everybody thought that it was, because I accomplished this hard thing, or, because I was so like tired and just happy for it to be over. And like, yes, there's aspects of that into it too. But the reality of it's bigger than me dawned upon me. There are people that are waiting for me to be everything that I was ever called to be. And if I am not that, then prayers go unanswered. So yes, I get the fruit of being able to enjoy, going through the process and evolving and all of those sorts of things. But it's so much bigger than just myself. And I refuse to let people go without if I have the opportunity to do something about it.
In the previous answer, you may not know that you did this, but you introduced a qualifier into your response. You originally said, I want to be the absolute best. And then you said, based on my own judgment, like, I'm going to be the best version of me. That's a qualifier, right? Mm-hmm. That's removing the big audacious goal of I'm going to be the best in the world to I'm going to be the best version of me. That response went the other direction. There is no qualifier in that response, right?
Yeah.
It's bigger than me, and that's why I'm doing it. And so I always find it interesting when I hear people give qualifiers to
Mhm.
whatever it is that they're doing. Something as small, and I remember this. Heidi posted a video. Who she hosts a podcast, and it's slipping my mind right now. But she hosts a podcast, and she had a video, and she was like, "Here's what I've been eating for leading up to this race."
Mhm.
And in there, she had to add in the qualifier. This isn't what I always eat,
Mhm.
because protecting herself against the trolls that would have come in and been like, "Why are you eating Oreos?" And why are whatever people are going to argue about. And so social media has given us this concept that we have to qualify things to put the force field around us
Mhm.
so that when the trolls come, it doesn't impact us.
Mhm.
I love the fact that you may not know that you introduced the qualifier and then you immediately removed it in the next answer. That's
Yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah. 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 I don't think that that wasn't intentional in terms of me putting it in there. But I do think what you said holds a lot of value in, the more that you put these bold, audacious statements out there, the more that people have to say about your bold, audacious statements. Um, and it definitely is interesting to go from, I don't know, I guess I'll say a creator that was kind of like speaking into the void versus now being a creator that is slowly starting to catch momentum and traction, and people having their thoughts and opinions on it, and being able to remain steadfast and firm in who you are and what your goals are, regardless of what people say. And I like the Bible tells me that faith comes from hearing. That's why I say it in so many of my videos. The more that I say it, the more that I believe it, the more that I achieve it. Um, and so I think I try to organically take out any of those qualifiers or take out any of those moments of me doubting myself in comparison to what people may say, because I know the more that I hear it, the more that I believe it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that, you pointing that out.
Words are so unbelievably powerful.
Yep.
The things you say to yourself matter. And I think that like you hit the nail on the head. Like the more positive you speak, you start to believe it. And
Mhm.
if you speak negatively about yourself, you're going to believe it. If you're worried about what other people think, you're going to start to believe it.
Yep.
And I want to come back to, you talk about it being bigger than yourself. And
Mhm.
I've thought a lot about this, and I want to see if you've heard it said this way before. But when you say that it's bigger than you, you're doing this for the 10-year-old Badia.
Badia.
Badia, sorry, my apologies. You're the 10-year-old Badia that wanted to see that for herself, that wanted that person that she could look up to and be like, I want to be like her.
Yeah.
And that's what I hear in it. And you talk about diversity, being able to have that be you for that next 10-year-old girl that comes up that doesn't have anybody to turn to. That's what I hear.
Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely that. It is making younger Dia as like proud as possible. Like all the tools, all the resources, all the things that she didn't have the opportunity to have. Now I get to go out and get them. Like growing up, I was the kid that like wanted to go to the Olympics, wanted to be the professional athlete, wanted to do all those things. And like, traditionally, especially in swimming, you see that go kind of like as a kid to a teenager, and then you start competing at like an Olympic level. And that wasn't my story. Hopefully High Rocks will go to the Olympics at some point in my like, career, and maybe I'll get the opportunity to make that dream come true. But yeah, I want to make m- younger Dia's wildest dreams possible. And to like all of the other little girls and little boys that like don't get the opportunity to have whatever, because life throws whatever at your way, and it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to do something about it. And I've made the decision to do something about it, and I'm going to be so excited as I continue, because I've already made younger Dia proud. But as I continue to get to love on that inner child in me.
Yeah, I had to say it because I thought about it a lot for myself, and I wanted that nothing more. Like, you're doing it for the little you that
Yeah.
needed that wanted that. So I'm gonna slip a question in here before Jason, because we're kind of getting close to our time that we usually go to, but I want to get your opinion on the definition of a hybrid athlete. So
Mm,
because I've come from the running space, I've come from soccer.
yeah.
This term hybrid athlete gets thrown around a lot.
Mhm.
So from your perspective, from the community that you've been in, you've seen, you've competed in, what is a definition of a hybrid athlete?
Yeah. It's so funny because I'm gonna pull Jason's word of duality once again, where for me, that term has a two-sided meaning. I'm actually planning to film a campaign around it, where hybrid athlete, I think traditionally across the board, what people consider is being somebody who has strength but also has endurance, somebody who has speed but also knows how to pace themselves. People who are able to be on both sides of the spectrum and knowing in which moments you need to draw upon that strength. You need to be able to be good across the board. And I think that's the real power in a hybrid athlete is knowing when you need to pull upon that speed or that strength or that endurance or that power or whatever the case may be. But I think deeper than me for me of what being the hybrid athlete means and what I have been trying to embody as the internet coining me as the Bantu knot girl is an athlete that represents all the things that athletes do of strength and power and endurance and all of that, but showing up with culture, showing up with representation, showing up with beauty and fashion and like all of the things that are not traditionally thought about when pulling into sport. Being that grit and that grace, being somebody who can be just a girl, but also being somebody that is going to kick this sled's butt at the same time. So I think hybrid athlete has so many different meanings, but that's what it means to me.
That's a great answer. As you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, at one point, I was a hybrid athlete in this sense. I was racing 100-mile ultras at the start of a year and then racing an Ironman towards the end of the year. And those are two different completely disciplines. And so that's a hybrid athlete. And then Evan asked me about the Oakland Marathon when we launched this show, and I've gone off the trails and back into road running. And I'm like, maybe that's a hybrid runner. Like maybe that's a coin I can start to flip around and get people to be less identified with one particular thing and just be a runner, right? Yes, you can run on trails, you can run ultras, but you can also run a 5K and a road marathon all in the same time and be a hybrid runner, for lack of a better phrase, in that scenario. We are bumping up on time, Badia. So I want to first say thank you for joining us and saying yes to the invitation to join us. More importantly, thank you for your honesty and openness and vulnerability throughout this conversation. We have had many guests cry on this show, but I don't know, Evan, if we've ever had a host and myself, like I was on the verge of tears during one of your answers. So I don't know that we've had that, but thank you for bringing out the emotion in me. We end our show. We end our show with a singular question to the guests, and we call it a simple question, but it's as simple as the first one, which is who is. This is very complex, right? Um, from this show, what are you going to take from this show and apply to your life going forward from today on?
I really loved how you highlighted me putting a qualifier into my statements. And that is something that I am going to be more intentional with thinking about and like recognizing the moments in which I place those in there and recognizing like why and then getting rid of it and choosing to not use a qualifier because I believe that I am as cool and wonderful and amazing as I possibly can be. So I think what I am taking away from the show is nothing qualifies me but God and myself. So I choose to be who I say I am, who God says I am, and I'm gonna be every bit of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. We are absolutely going to have you back on the show, most likely after you become the High Rocks
Let's do it.
champion.
We call dibs on the first one.
Yeah.
You
Thanks, Badia. Thank you for joining us.
No problem. Thank you.
Dude, that was an amazing conversation. Like, to get all of that emotion in 60 minutes is unreal.
It's honestly, these shows are like waves to me. It's like you don't know when one's going to come crashing down on top of you, and when it does, it hits hard, and then the next few are nice and easy, and then here comes another one. And I think that's the beauty of this show is we never know which direction it's going to go, but we always know that we're going to be able to get that's a great question.
Yeah. It's awesome. I appreciate you being on the show and co-hosting it with me because it has allowed me to grow as an adult. I would ask people to go back to episodes 1, 2, and 3 when we launched Enduring Minds and go listen to those conversations and then listen to what we're saying now and see how growth happens over time. It's not immediate. It's not linear. It happens, but you have to be patient with yourself. So I'd ask you and encourage you to go back and listen to episodes 1, 2, and 3, where Evan, Ohm, and I introduce ourselves in this show. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for everything that you provide to our community here with Enduring Minds as listeners. Please don't forget, subscribe, rate, review, and comment, especially if you're on Spotify and YouTube, as it absolutely does help us with the algorithm. And it helps us continue to bring in everyday athletes like Badia Weeks, who are willing and ready to share their openness, honesty, and their vulnerability, with us. So thank you, and we'll see you next time on the next Enduring Minds. Don't forget, you are not alone in going the distance and breaking the silence.